The CSS Diner web app is a fun way to get yourself some good practice if you're early on in your journey of becoming a developer. The best way to find it is just Google it, CSS Diner, and that's the site there, flukeout.github. So I'll select that. You'll go through 32 levels of increasing difficulty. The first few cover core fundamental concepts of CSS like element selectors, as you can see here, just type selector, and class selectors. And then later the levels will cover more advanced concepts like only of type. In this video, I'll go through all the levels of this game until the very end and try to provide some helpful explanations of the answers along the way. All right, so level one is just the type selector. That's the one you would have seen before. What we've got here on the table is two plates. So you've got tips over on the side, like I said. So selects all elements of type A. So if you think about it in terms of div or p, paragraph, UL, they're all different element types. So you can see here, this is just two plates. So we want to select the plates. So there's only really one option here. And I'll put this in, it's going to be the plate. So let's come across plate, and that's going to select both plates. All right, level two. So we've got the same type selector, so it's exactly the same as the last one, but this time we've got two choices. We've got either bento or plate. So it wants us to select the bento, so simple, put in bento, that's all done. All right, level three, this is something a little bit different, but still pretty basic. We've got the ID selector. So by putting the hashtag ID in here, you're selecting, you can see over the right hand, selects the element with specific ID. So you can combine them, but you don't have to at this point yet. You've got ID fancy is identifying with the fancy plate, and the challenge here is selecting the fancy plate. So pretty straightforward, ignore the other two. We're just going to go hashtag fancy. And that one there is going to select the one shaking fancy plate. All right, up to level four, we've got the descendant selector. So selects an element inside another element. Now you can see here we've actually got two apples, but only one is on the plate. So the challenge is select the apple that's on the plate. And so this descendant selector, you've got selects all B inside of A, for example. So this one we'd want to go select all apples inside of the plate. So it's called the descendant because it's inside another element. So basically what we want to do here is ignore the other apple. So we've got two apples, but we want to ignore the one that's on its own and just select the one that's on its plate. So let's put it in here. We've got plate and we've got apple. And you can see the structure there is just A, B. So plate, apple, replace the two. That one's all done. All right, level five. So it's combining the last couple. So basically we're combining the descendant and the ID selector. So what we want to do here is select the pickle on the fancy plate. Now remember the fancy plate is the ID fancy. So here we'll be using hashtag ID or hashtag fancy in order to find the pickle. And then the pickle will be on the plate. So it'll be using the descendants. We want to ignore, obviously, the pickle that's not on the fancy plate in this case, and that's where I guess the challenge comes in for this one. All right, level six, we're bringing classes into it. So if you think of classes, in this case, in the similar way to the way you think about ID, so it's instead of hashtag, it's going to be a full stop before. We've got some classes here that are identifying small, and so the apple is class small, they're the small apples. Select the small apples. So in this case, there is only two apples that are small, both identified by the class. So full stop, class name is the same as full stop small in this case. That's pretty straightforward, it ignores the rest. Level seven, all right, so what we're doing here is combining the class selector with another selector. So it wants us to select the small oranges. Oranges just being the selector in this case. So you've got a.class name as the example. So you've got oranges and then you've got the class name small. And so you're going to be combining them in the same way. Over the side here, you've got the example of hashtag big.wide selects all elements with ID big that also have the class wide. That's combining an ID and a class. The one above it ul.important selects all the ul elements that have the class important. So you can put this together, and basically what we're going to have here is orange, because it's selecting that selector, and then we're going to go, we want the small, so dot small, because that's how the class identifies it. So we do have a small apple there, but it's going to ignore it because it's combining the two. Level 8 wants you to put you back into it. So apparently we're combining what we've learned so far to solve this one. So select the small oranges in the bentos. So we'll probably at least need to do the combination of the class and the selector, as well as a selector on its own. So we'll start with bento. We definitely need bento. Dot small. So at the start of that, I'll put orange to combine the two. Dot small oranges on the bento. There we go. That's ignoring the apple there that could identify if you put apple. Level 9, and we've got some pickles now. So select all plates and bentos. This is combining our selectors just by using a comma. So there's what we need here is the bentos and the plates. So we're going to go plate, comma, to make it select both, and then bento, and that's it. Nice easy one for level 10. So we've got the universal selector. So you can use the star and you can select everything. So it says here we want to select everything. That's it. I'm just going to put the star in and we're all done. Level 11 is building on from level 10. So you can combine the universal selector with an element that we're selecting. So here we've got select everything on a plate. Now we want the plate and we want everything that's on a plate. And so just plate star, and that's it. So level 12 here is when we start talking about siblings, so elements that follow one another. So basically, if you look at the HTML, the right-hand side of this here, usually if it's formatted correctly, elements that have the same indentation, so at the same level of in the indentation, they're siblings. Here we want to select every plate that's every apple, sorry, that's next to a plate. You can see here we've got a small and a big apple, but that is not going to matter because we're going to go plate and then plus and then apple, because it's not really identifying. They're still apples whether or not they're small. So plate plus apple, and we're all done. So we just did the adjacent selector, and it selects just the one element. This one is general sibling selector, so it's very similar except for the fact that it's going to get all elements instead of just one, which was the one we just did. So here we're selecting the pickles beside the bento. So we've got a bento here with a small orange on it, and then some pickles, and then a plate with a pickle. So it'll be those two shaking. So what we're going to do is bento, and then the little, what is that even called? I think it's called the tilde. So we'll go bento tilde pickle, and that's going to get them. All right, so select the apple directly on the plate for level 14. So we're using the child selector here, and it's going to select the children that are directly below, the child directly below another element. So you can see here that there's actually a bento on top of a plate, which has the apple on top of it, and there's also a plate with just the apple on it. So we want to pick the apple that's directly on the plate. So it's the direct child of the plate, essentially. So it's just a greater than symbol in between the two for this one. So let's get that in. Apple. So plate, and then the child of the plate is the apple. And that's it. So we've covered child and children of elements. Here we've got the first child pseudo selector. So this one is asking us to select the top orange. So it's going to be the child of the plate, and the top one is going to be the first child. So what we want to do here, we'll use, you can see there, we've got it, it's first child, first dash child, and then we want the orange. So we want an orange, which is the first child of something in this case, and there's only one. The bento doesn't have anything. So we're going to go orange.
and it's an orange. That's the first child, and that's it. All right, we're at the halfway mark at level 16. So we just covered first child. Here it's going over the only child pseudo selector. Wants us to select the apple and the pickle on the plate. So there is another plate, which is the fourth one along. It has two children. And we've also got a bento box, which has a child, which is a pickle. But we've only got two that are plates that have one child. So all those things in common, we can go with plate here, and then we'll use the only child pseudo selector to select the two items that are only children on a plate. And so that should do it. There we go. This one might be the sneakiest one yet. So we want to select the small apple and the pickle for level 17. So here we're looking at last child pseudo selector. Again, we're following on from the same theme with the first child and only child that we've already talked about. So it works exactly the same. It's looking for the last child. So the small apple and the pickle, the small apple's on the plate. And so it's going to be a child, obviously. The pickle, though, not so sure. So the one thing to remember here is that if it's the only child in the element, it counts as the first, only, and last child. So there's one here, there's a plate that's got two oranges on it that it can't really suit. We could go last child for that one to get an orange, but we want the apple and pickle. So remembering that last child and only child can be the same if it's an only child, if that makes sense. What we're going to do here is put in the last child pseudo selector, and then because it's a class, dot small is the only one without a plate parent, so that's going to get both. Still on the children of elements for level 18, what if you have a bunch of kids and you want to select one out of the group? We've got the nth child pseudo selector. So here we want to select the third plate. So basically, if you think you replace the n with 3, you've got the third. So nth child, and then in brackets is where you put the number that you want to select it out. So it's just 3, and there we go. All right, for number 19, we have another one that could be helpful, just like the last one, if an element has a bunch of children. So last time we had the nth child, and this is the nth last child. So it's exactly the same, except counting from the bottom. So it's the same as the last one, but you count backwards. Now, an easy mistake to make, which I'll put in here now, is basically count from the back. So you've got a bento there, you've got a plate that's got some oranges on it, and then a bento. So 1, 2, 3. So let's put in 3, see what we've got. Does that work? No, it doesn't. So the reason is that plate is loaded with oranges. So we need to identify what we want here. So let's go bento and then 3 back, and that should do it. Number 20, we're covering something a little bit different again. First of type selector. So it wants us to select the first apple. There's an orange at the beginning, but the first apple is second. So this selector selects the first element of that type within another element. So what we want to do is we want an apple, that's for sure. And then we'll put in the selector first of type, because Apple would just find all apples. First of type, that's done. All right, so level 21 we're up to, and this one combines a couple of the last challenges. So select all even plates. Now we're looking at the nth of type selector. So it's going to look at the type. So all we've got here is plates versus fancy plates. And it wants us to select all the evens. So we could put in plate 2 if it was identifying that second one, the first one that's shaking. But what we'll do here is put in even, because you can see 2, 4, and 6 are the ones we want. And there we go. Level 22, nth of type selector with formula. So basically selecting every second plate starting from the third is what it wants. This one in practice can be complicated. For the purposes of this game, should be pretty straightforward, because we're going to put in the 2n there, and then for the every second plate, and then starting with the third, it'll just be the +3. So we've only got really 2 things here, 2 elements to work with. So we're going to go into type 2n plus 3, and that'll find every second plate starting from the third plate. All right, for level 23, select the apple on the middle plate, and we're using the only of type selector. Okay, that's a little bit tricky. So if I put in just the only of type selector, that's going to get the pickle and the apple on the second and third plate. Um, Only of type, so it's a little bit confusing here because the apple, the little apple, isn't the only of type. You can see there's actually a little apple on the first plate that's within the fancy plate, but it's also sitting with a regular apple. So here, if I put apple in only of type, it's the only type of its own that's within the element. It's the only type sitting by itself, I guess is the best way to explain this one. It's a little bit confusing, but that's the answer. All right, following on from the only of type, level 24 is going to cover last of type. So basically, you probably understand what that means at this point. Selects each last element of that type within another element. So we want the last apple and orange. So if you go last of type, uh, if you put in the orange or the apple, it's not going to get both. So what's something that is common amongst both of these things? They're both under the class small. So if we go last of type and then put in the selector for the small class, um, that should do it because just thinking quickly, that won't get the pickles. Yeah, that will be it. So let's put in the small class. Remember dot to find the class and then small. Last of type of the small class gets both. Good. We've got a bit of an easier one here for level 25. So it's the empty selector. So it's selecting elements that don't have any children. You can see there's three of those. There's two bentos and one plate. So we want to select the empty bentos. So we're just going to put in this empty and then we want bento just to take away the plate and that's it. All right, we're up to level 26. Wants us to select the big apples. So for this one, we're using the negation pseudo class. So select all elements that don't match the negation selector. So we want apples. So I've got in here apples not. Now we need to work backwards, I think, a little bit. I need to work backwards to work this one out. So essentially, we can probably just ignore the pickle and the orange. We've got two big apples. What is the other one that the others aren't is probably the quickest way to do this and the quickest way to think about it. So we want an apple and not. What is it not? It's not sitting on the fancy plate and it's not small. So the quickest way there is just it's not small. So that'll take away the other apple and that's it. Level 27, we've got some names here. So select the items that are for somebody. We're using the attribute selector that selects all elements that have a specific attribute. You can see here that the way it's laid out in the HTML viewer that all of the plates that are for somebody have a specific attribute. It's got for Clara, for Alice, and for Ethan. So basically, that one's pretty straightforward. We can just put that in for. That is selecting the attribute, and there we go. Number 28. Now, this is pretty similar to the last one. Select the plates that are for somebody. We're using the attribute selector that selects all elements that have a specific attribute. Now, before they were just attributes that were named, the difference here is the subtle difference that we may not have picked up on is Steve ordered a bento. So Steve, we don't want to include. So they're both plates for Luke and Sarah, and they're both for somebody. So plate for instead of bento for, and that's the one. Level 29, attribute value selector. So we want to select Vitaly's meal. So select all elements that have a specific attribute value. So here we're just going to copy this input in. The attribute is for, and then the value is going to just be the name. It's just the string that's in there. So we'll put his exact name in the string. So it's for Vitaly. That's going to identify that bento box. Number 30, we're nearly there. So this selector looks almost identical to the last one we did. Attribute equals value, and then we put in the string where we chose Vitaly's bento box. But there's a little up arrow there, and that's going to select, essentially, it's going to be the start. The start of the for is this. And so you can see it wouldn't normally work, but because we've got two names that are Sam and Sarah, they both start with Sa. and then what's the third one? Mary. So these both start with SAR. So basically 4, and then the start of it is SA. And that's going to identify those two, and it's basically going to be able to ignore everything else. You've got a pickle on a plate and a apple on a bento. That doesn't matter. Level 31, this is almost exactly the same as the last one again, except you can see here we've got a $ instead of a up arrow, and that's because it is going to be the end instead of the beginning. So we want to select the items for names that end with atto, and so we've got 2 of those, and one is otto. So Hayato, Ryoto, and Minoto. So it's the same as the last one, but it comes in exactly the same. We're just going to put the $ in. So it's still the 4, and then the $ and then the string, and then we'll put atto in because that's going to identify the 2 that we want, and it's going to ignore Otto and the other 2 sitting on the table. Here we go, we're at the final level. So level 32 out of 32. It's basically the same as the last, I think, 3 where we're using attributes or selecting attribute selectors. We had the start and the end. I forget what the other one was, but we've got wildcard here. So it's the same as the others again, except that star wildcard that we learned before. So again, it's just going to be the 4. We want to select the meals that contain OBB in their name, Bobby, Robbie, and Timmy. So obviously we'll pick, OBB is going to go in there. So it's just the 4, then star equals, and then the string of OBB. That's going to ignore Timmy's pickle. Thank you. No, thank you. No, seriously, thank you. Thank you. No, thank you.